Oh, yeah, I'll get these live streams started out. Always got to give it a minute or two because there's probably some commercials or stuff at the beginning that people have to like watch or skip or something like that. I'm not sure. How is it? Do you have to watch the commercials at the beginning, or are you allowed to skip some, or are there even commercials when these things start? I figure I may as well be doing something for a moment or two while everybody's coming in. That way people don't miss anything. Just in case I was going to say something important. Not that I would, but I might. It might happen. Sometimes I might open up my mouth and something interesting might pop out. I'm not going to make any promises. Hi there. Well, hello, good people. I can see you now. Hi, Jason here at Green Country Agri-Forestry. Wednesday night, 8:30 p.m., and that means it's time for another live stream. Vicky's in the house. Hiya, hiya. I was running a little bit. I was running a little bit behind, and as a matter of fact, I told Mary on the phone earlier today that she got me a new coffee cup. Guys, check this out. Mary got me this. Anyway, I was saying I wasn't sure if I was going to have a live stream or not because I didn't know if I was going to be completely and totally spent and exhausted by the time I got done with today, considering that we were having triple-digit heat, and today is the day that I had to choose to plant our corn, the second planting of corn. But I got out there and I got it done in waves and multiple changings of shirts. You'll notice this one is already starting to get wet right there. The hurrier I go, the behinder I get. You know, that phrase comes from Oklahoma. As a matter of fact, that was a saying from Roy Rogers. Was it Roy Rogers or Will Rogers? Will Rogers used to say that. The hurrier I go, the behinder I get. It was Will Rogers. That's right. A buddy of Wiley Post. Wiley Post was another Oklahoman, very early pioneer in the aviation industry. People don't know this, but Oklahoma is responsible for a lot of the aviation industry, some of the space industry stuff. We were hoping to get one of the used space shuttles because of our contributions to of course, the program. We kind of figured we were entitled to one, maybe not Dallas so much, but us definitely. But apparently, ours blew up, so we don't get that one. Bad taste joke. Eric is saying that late planting of corn will mature faster, and yes, that's my experience too. It jumps up and it gets going, and I do have plenty of time. If I start the clock from today, 90 days from today, it shouldn't be our first frost. We'll be coming up on Halloween, and Halloween weekend sometimes we get some frost, but that means that we should be able to get it all the way done. All righty. Well, my great grandmother survived the Trail of Tears. That's how I wound up here. She married my great grandfather, obviously. Great grandfather. His name was John. He was a artilleryman for the Ohio contingent of the Union Army during the war between the states, and he lost a leg for his trouble, so he retired and decided to move to Indian Territory and open up one of those trading posts on the river. That's apparently a good way to make a living. So that's what he did. His son married an Indian girl, and that's how I got here. Well, that's how my grandfather got here, and then of course he had my father, he had me, and here I am. Anyway, we were going to be talking about the Holocene era, which is the current era, the end of the Ice Age, or the warming period that we're in currently in the Ice Age, mankind and invasive species, and why some states out there may actually be harming their ecosystems by their policies regarding non-native species. So, I hope you guys are ready for this one. It's going to be interesting. You guys like my sign? What do you think? Is $5 too much for a dozen duck eggs? I'll tell you what, it's like twice what you pay for chicken eggs these days. Speaking of chickens are shock, not a native species in North America. But they didn't get here with the Europeans. I mean, yes, Europeans did bring some here, but it wasn't just the Europeans that brought chickens here. They were brought here by the Polynesian boat peoples a long, long time ago in prehistory, and that's what got the chicken to every continent. I know I've talked about the worms before, but it bears repeating. I'm going to go into an article here if I can actually find the thing. I know I should already have this thing preloaded, right? There is a saying that I've heard several times that all worms in North America, I'm actually typing this in the search engine right now, are non-native. Can you believe that statement? All worms in North America are all not native. Well, actually, it's not entirely true. The more true statement is most earthworms. No, that's not true either. Okay. There are some that are not native. But the question is, where are they not native to? We'll get into that in a moment. All right. When it comes to the northernmost states in North America, I want you to think about something here. About 13 to 14,000 years ago, there was an event that caused a sudden return of glaciation. But even further back, we had the glacial limit for the previous ice age. That was about 20,000 years ago. And the glaciers came all the way down from the polar regions, all the way down. They didn't quite cover all of Alaska because of warm currents up the Gulf. And it didn't quite cover all of the East Coast because warm currents coming up from the Atlantic. But they came all the way down to Kansas. And they stopped at Kansas. They didn't come any further south than Kansas. And of course, the coastal regions remained free of ice. And the southernmost states remained free of ice. And for the most part, species that can survive in zones 4 or so had no problem at all surviving in the southernmost states during this time period. This is important because the claim that is made is that during the Ice Age, the earthworms died off. Here it is. This is let me find this thing and share it here. Close that thing, and make sure we're not putting out some advertisements that we were intending to. All right. They changed things on share screen. Here is the news article. Let me put this up here and make sure that my head's not in the way here. Actually, I'll just go ahead and move my head all the way out. How's that? There we go. Now we can see it. All right, this is CBC News Science. Invasive earthworms are remaking our forests, and climate scientists are worried. Oh my, what in the world could this be? Here's a picture of some worms. Worms are radically changing our forest soils and depleting terrestrial carbon stocks. Say it ain't so. And here it says North America's forests have been largely earthworm-free since the last ice age. This is the claim that's being made, that the ice age killed off the indigenous earthworms, or if they were here before it, they certainly weren't here afterwards. The indigenous earthworms in North America, not here anymore. They're all gone. And that means that invaders from outside are arriving, burrowing into leaf litter and changing soil composition. And this is a bad thing, right? So I want you to think about something real quick before we get too far down the rabbit hole here. Pardon me. I need to click on StreamYard if I want to actually change that. All right, we're going to go back to this view. Okay. So ice comes down all the way to Kansas. It's sort of U-shaped going back up into Canada. This big, huge sheet of ice, mile thick, Laurentide ice sheet, massive sheet of ice. As it retreats, as this glacier retreats and leaves the area behind it, there isn't any, sorry, bad English. There aren't any trees growing here. It's been covered by glacier for several thousands of years. There aren't any trees. There aren't any worms. There aren't any gophers. There aren't any snails. There aren't any ducks. There aren't any lizards. There aren't any snakes. There aren't any birds. There's nothing. It is a bare, scraped mass of rock and deposits of soil and moraine and things that are left behind as the ice melts and retreats. It is barren. There is no life. If you're living in Wisconsin, and really I'm calling out this Wisconsin in particular for their posture on invasive species, all manner of what they call invasive non-native species. If you're living in Wisconsin, every species that comes in, if it's alive, it's not native. Everything from the deposits of moss in the bogs, those so precious deposits of moss that we aren't going to be able to restore anytime soon. Well, yeah, those have been built up over the last 20,000 years since the ice has retreated, and all the life that came with them was built up over the past 20,000 years since the ice retreated. And incidentally, that sphagnum moss is non-native in the northern portions of North America. It simply is not native to there. The only thing that would be native to there are long dead and extinct. They passed away over the course of the Ice Age. So this idea of invasive species, non-native species coming in, and these being a problem, we need to examine this and think about this critically, because the world has changed. Ecosystems have changed. Catastrophes have occurred. The soil has been damaged in places, and in places there is recovery work that needs to be done. True, whenever the ice was at its limit, the areas in the northern states had no earthworms at all in them. And all of the earthworms that have populated there since are actually not native. The question, of course, is on some particular ones that have come up and received some critique. And we're talking about that today. So here we go. For the past 300 years, a slow motion invasion has been unfolding under our feet. Year by year, a plethora of invasive earthworms have been quietly burrowing their way through our forest leaf litter, grasslands, and backyard gardens. Hang on a second. Well, we'll cover that a little bit more. The main worm that we're talking about actually doesn't like growing in grasslands, but I guess we're going to lump everything all together, right? Although earthworms are beneficial for growing food, research shows they are harming our forests and could potentially be contributing to climate damage or climate change. I'm sorry, I actually got a chance to look at this so-called research, and it is an awful lot of copy and paste from a source that apparently never once did any time in the field or looked at the species they were talking about. A little disturbing, but this is a problem with research in our university system today. There is an awful lot of junk research out there, and you really do have to get to the abstracts, look at them, read through them, see if what's in there passes the smell test, maybe applies a few other disciplines to the information that's being presented. If it's about climate change or climate or weather patterns, and they make certain claims, you may want to apply physics to those claims and see if they actually hold true whenever you apply the rest of the tools in our scientific toolkit to them. And in many cases, they don't. So here we go. Earthworms, they say here, are not native to most of North America. Okay. Until about 10,000 years ago, a vast ice sheet, that would be the Laurentide ice sheet, we talked about this earlier, mile thick, covered the northern third of the North American continent. Came down all the way to Kansas. But it didn't come down to Kansas coast to coast. It was kind of a U-shape. The coastal areas remain clear. Scientists think that it killed off the earthworms that may have inhabited the area before the last glaciation. Okay, now so far this sounds reasonable. Actually, this doesn't sound bad at all. If we're talking about the area covered by the glaciers, then yes, the earthworms would have been killed off, but the same earthworms that would have lived there continued to survive on the North American continent, just not in those areas, and they've been able to work their way north again as conditions have become favorable for them to do so. Here's a little picture of a couple of worms. Aren't they cute? All right, but these are common earthworms, the Lumbricus terrestris. Lumbricus is the genus, of course. All right. Earthworms were reintroduced to North America by the arrival of European settlers in the 18th century. See, this is the problem, right? This is the problem right here. Okay, there are now more than 30 species of non-native earthworms in Canada. Well, if there's 30 species of earthworms in Canada, then there are 30 species of non-native earthworms in Canada. So we've already established that if it's there, it's not native, because the only thing that would be native to there is barren rock and nothing living. All right, so according to Michael McTavish, a postdoctoral research fellow at the University of Toronto, specializing in the ecology of non-native earthworms, which is really kind of weird considering where he's at. They're all not native. All right, he says, quote, by physically changing the soil environment, earthworms affect everything from decomposition of organic matter to nutrient cycling, carbon storage, how water moves through the soil, said McTavish. They just kind of affect everything across the board. And that's the end of the quote. That is all 100% completely and totally true, and it's not a bad thing. So, hang on. Let's go back to this statement here that our writer is making. Our writer is saying earthworms were reintroduced to North America with the arrival of European settlers in the 18th century. So we are left to presume that North America, and we've already determined that obviously it wasn't all of North America, but only the portion of North America that was covered by the glaciers during the glacial maximum. North America has been deprived of earthworms until the mighty white man arrives with his earthworms to save the poor, unfortunate people here in the New World from their utter lack of earthworms from which they've been suffering since the Ice Age. I've got some problems with this. I really do. One of the big problems, of course, is according to the people who live in North America and lived in North America before the Europeans arrived, and incidentally, they began arriving before the 18th century. Long before they began arriving, the people who were here already said that when they came here by boats, many of them, wait a minute, if they were going to come here by boats, where did they come from? Well, we're not really sure exactly where they come from, but some of them seem to have maybe come from Europe, and some of them seem to maybe have come from Asia. But they came here by boats. And this is the interesting thing about migration, is that people don't migrate one way. People don't just go, ooh, we're going to go this way. No. People go there, and they come back. And they do what they do what the Europeans did whenever the Europeans came here. You guys remember when the Europeans came here, right? It was great. They came over here and go, wow, look at this. There's this plant over here, this bean here. This is this most amazing bean. Let's take a look at this thing. And pardon me, I'm just talking in the background, and you can't even see me. I'm just being very animated. So here's this bean here, right? There's this bean, and we can take this bean and we could take this back home with us. Look at this beautiful bean. It grows this vine. It's got purple holes whenever it's growing. It's awesome, and it produces these black beans. And you can eat them like green beans. These are really cool, but you can save them as dry beans. They're soup beans too. Let's take these back home with us. Let's grow these. And they did this with all different kinds of plants and animals. And of course, as they immigrated, they brought along the plants and animals that they're used to as well. So they brought over horses, for example, the Spanish did, before the 18th century, incidentally. Well before the 18th century, the Spanish were bringing over horses. So they were bringing over animals. They were bringing over the plants that they needed to survive, which means also, incidentally, they brought over the canna lily, which we grow, which started out in China and then eventually made its way around here. And of course, anytime you're taking plant material, including roots, and you're picking it up and moving from point A to point B, you're going to be moving the soil. And if you're moving the soil, you're going to be moving the insect life that lives in that soil. And in which case, we're talking about the European nightcrawler that they're worrying about being invasive, moving into forests and stuff. And they go, oh no, the Europeans brought the European nightcrawler when they came to North America. And the reason they're thinking this is because the same nightcrawler in North America is found in Europe. And we already said, oh, all the nightcrawlers died off in North America. So if there were no earthworms in North America, then the European nightcrawler has to have been brought here by the Europeans. That's how it got here. This is the rationale, right? Completely and totally ignoring every single indigenous tribes person, their legends that say that when they came here, that they brought the means of survival with them. So they would have brought those. And now the question becomes, is the European nightcrawler, if we're going to be honest about this, is the European nightcrawler indigenous to North America? Let me ask that the other way. Is the European nightcrawler native and indigenous to Europe? Or is it invasive from America to Europe during that previous span of migration, whenever the North American continent received its influx of its first European colonists, who were, of course, what we call the indigenous peoples of North America? Here's the other question. How about the Asian jumping worm? Asian night crawlers, also found in the nice warm places of the South. They're here in Oklahoma too. Now, they've been here the entire time I've been here. They're not a recent sudden invasion. They've been here since I was a child. Since before I was a child, I learned how to capture these night crawlers in the woods from an old Indian. It was an old Indian trick. And this is how they would catch worms for fishing. Eric is saying the European nightcrawler is no invasive on my land. Oh no, oh no, whatever we do, it's invasive. It's not native. It's going to drive out the native species. Of course, in the case of everything north of Kansas in North America, it's all not native. It's all not native. Brian's saying, so buying red wrigglers is a scam. No, red wrigglers are a different kind of worm. They're the Einish fetida. They're a composting worm. And it's not a scam. Red wigglers are perfectly fine for composting, and they're very good. It's just they're not night crawlers. And night crawlers are what you want if you have a forest ecosystem. You don't want compost worms in a forest ecosystem. You want night crawlers, and you want it because of what they do in changing the structure of the soil. You could say that you've got opposing forces at work at the edge of a forest ecosystem. And these opposing forces have sometimes they're favored one way and sometimes they're favored the other way. But you could say on the grassland side of the ecosystem, as it comes up and intersects with the forest ecosystem, that on the grasslands, you've got your grasshoppers out here. And they're busy munching. And Mary knows something about this. Like there's lots and lots of grass. Why aren't they eating the grass? Why do they want to eat everything else? And they want to eat everything else on the edge of the forest. So you have your canopy trees up here. You got your understory trees over here, shrubs and stuff here. And then as we go, we're working our way out of forest towards grasslands. Grasshoppers are out here, and they're munching away right on this edge. But they're not eating grass. They're eating all of the little stuff that one day will become the big stuff here at the edge. So the grasshoppers are working, trying to keep this area grassland. That's what they want. Meanwhile, back in the forest, you've got the earthworms at work. And not just any earthworms. These are night crawlers. And if you're in North America, then it's going to be one of two flavors. It's going to be the same night crawler that they find in Europe, or the same night crawler that they find in Asia, or some variation thereof. And the question of whether or not it started here and wound up there, or started there and wound up here, is kind of moot, because people have been going back and forth for so long, and nobody was keeping track of where the worms were at any given time until some researcher popped up and said, the white man must have brought the worms here with him. Oh no, they're non-native, they're invasive, the white man is bad. Okay? That's what I'm reading here in these articles, is this sort of ideology trying to make an excuse for why this thing is a bad thing, because it must have come with the Europeans, and the Europeans are bad, and everything else that they did is just bad. It's bad. It's horrible. It's white man not necessarily bad. White man not necessarily good. White man has really nothing to do with the story at all. So so let's get on to what is actually going on here, which is as these areas, these ecosystems are becoming recovered from the damage that was done to them as the ice moved across them and then retreated away from them. These ecosystems are now able to support a more diverse life, more diverse life, including some of the macro decomposers that are necessary for taking large amounts of leaf litter in the forests and converting them into soil. And you need something that can convert a lot of leaf litter if you get to the point where your forests are now able to produce large amounts of biomass. And if you're getting to the point where your former barren, scraped off rock shelf, the ledge of North America here, is now supporting a large amount of biodiversity and producing an awful lot of leaf litter to the point where it can benefit from something like a night crawler moving into your forest, you should be saying, oh my goodness, thank you, they finally got here. We've been wondering how long it would take for you to show up. Because here's what they're doing in the soil. As the leaves fall, leaves are falling, they're hitting the ground, bump, 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 piling up deep. They get rained on, they get fungi all through them. The fungi do a certain amount of decomposition, and they break it down to a mat. Now, this mat gets kind of spongy, I guess would be a good way to put it, after it's been sitting here for 5, 10, 15, 20 years. How long does this mass of old decomposed fungi material have to sit here? I don't know. It's going to take a while until something can break it down beyond that point. This is what macro decomposers are for. Now, of course, here in green country, we have lots of macro decomposers. We've got crickets, we've got wood lice, we've got some kind of beetles I've never seen before. Really, everything's crawling around there. They're busily working at taking that leaf litter and they're breaking it up into smaller components. But they can only get it down so far. Only so far. And then we need to have something else come in and finish the job. And this typically is where we have the worms do the job. Now, if you were in North America just after the glacial period and you're starting to have your pioneer forest come in and your pioneer species and everything else that you're needing to fill in all of those niches in your ecosystem. And they were all vacant. 100% everything in North America above Kansas inland, was completely wiped out. There's no native species there. Everything has to come in and colonize from outside. And a lot of them are coming back and colonizing from here in the southernmost states of the United States. They're making their way north. They're doing what they're supposed to do. You've now got this point where you have all this leaf litter that's piling up, thick and thick and thick, right? Nice thick leaf litter. You're used to this. You walk in the forest, you can look, you can see the ground, the leaves cover everything. Oh, isn't it lovely? Isn't it lovely? It's such a lovely thing. And this area, your understory is all nice and clear. There's not a lot of brush. Ken is asking about audio. Did I lose audio? Did I lose audio or something? I just saw that pop up. I don't know. It could happen. Okay, so hopefully you guys can hear me. So you have your leaf litter. Oh, okay. So you have your leaf litter built up. You have me worried, Ken. It's like, oh no, have I been talking this entire time? Nobody can hear me. You have this leaf litter built up, and it needs those decomposers to come and finish breaking it down. And you need something that can do the job quickly. And what it's going to do, the earthworms, as they gobble up the mycelium that's left after those leaves have been decayed by fungi, they take all of that organic matter and they combine it with grit, with sand, silt, some of the clay, the silica hydrates from the soil, and they create a worm casting, which is just a pellet, basically. And the night crawlers that we have, the Asian jumping worms, as they call them, they make pretty big castings. Somebody said they're about the size of coffee grounds. Nah, they're more like the size of chocolate cake sprinkles. In all actuality, they're not coffee ground size. They're more like chocolate cake sprinkles. They're pretty big, and yes, they do change the texture of the soil. They are loose. They are well draining, but yet they retain moisture. Whenever they're on the surface and you have nothing but them, they get a little bit dry. So the surface, if there's no leaves left, that is nothing but these worm castings. It can be dry, But somebody who just looks at it goes, oh, wow, it's all dried up. And all they need to do is put their finger down into it and realize, oh, just below that crust on the surface, everything is moist from the tip of my finger on down, because these castings retain moisture much, much better than the native soil ever did. And so they've taken the soil, they've restructured it, they've made it so that it retains moisture. They've made it so that the water flows evenly through it, so that there can be nice air channels, so that the roots of the plants can get air the way they're supposed to, get water the way they're supposed to, nutrients of water flow easily the way they're supposed to, but you don't have stagnant conditions in the soil where the water just stays there on the roots until the roots suffocate and die off. So the worms are doing this for you. And they're great for a forest ecosystem this way. I'm going to switch back over here and continue reading. All right. Now here it says that they are threatening forest diversity. Earthworms are ecosystem engineers, meaning they play a huge role in shaping their environment. Yes, they do. See, the earthworms are responsible for making this a progressing forest environment, not a grasslands environment. The grasshoppers are wanting to maintain a grasslands environment. They fight the forest coming on. The earthworms want to progress the forest environment, making deeper, richer soils, requiring plants that have deeper, stronger root systems. We're talking older trees, more advanced trees, fewer of the pioneer species. Are you following along? Normally, microbes and other soil-dwelling organisms such as mites, nematodes, millipedes, and fungi break down organic matter in Canadian forests. They have been doing this. I'm going to interject here. I'm going to put a little, this is where the article is. I'm going to interject right there. They've been doing that up to this point in time because there has not been a significant enough quantity of organic matter or conditions necessary to support the kind of macro decomposers that are now coming into these forest ecosystems. Okay, they turn leaves and wood bits into soil and free up the nutrients that were once bound in organic matter. See, nothing is wrong with any of that. In the absence of earthworms, the litter layer, which is composed of old leaves and detritus that is built up on the soil floor breaks down very slowly. I was just describing this actually, so I'm glad to see that they actually know a little bit of something here, right? But let's see if they wind up taking it to the wrong conclusion. When earthworms move into our forest, they have the potential to rapidly change these ecosystems by devouring the leaf litter. They break down plant matter in much the same way as other invertebrates, but they do it much faster. In essence, worms speed up decomposition, which can be a bad thing for ecosystems used to taking it slow. Okay, so something you need to know about earthworms, all earthworms, including the night crawlers. Their mouth parts are so small that they cannot take a bite out of a leaf in the way a cricket can, or in the way that a woodlouse can. Things have to be very, very small, which means that most of this leaf litter has to have already been through a primary decomposition process where one of these other decomposers has had at it, or it's been acted upon by fungi. The earthworms are going to be eating up the fungi layer at the bottom of that stack of leaf litter, causing the overall stack to reduce in depth. And as they do so, yes, they have the option for more of the leaves to get acted upon by fungi and other macro decomposers. So they do convert a lot more rapidly. However, the earthworms are not taking whole leaf litter and consuming whole leaf litter and turning those into worm castings at the expense of everything else. That simply is not happening. Okay. So can it be hard on an ecosystem that's used to taking it slow? Well, yes, it's changing the ecosystem. That's actually kind of the point. Your ecosystem is now at the stage of development where it can change and become a more, what's the word I'm looking for? An older growth forest. Not necessarily old growth, but an older growth forest. And actually in some parts of Canada, yeah, they're about ready to go all the way into old growth forests, like the Pacific Northwest already is. Remember the Pacific Northwest? I didn't show you a picture of this, did I? I just sort of described it. But whenever the ice limit had been reached, that ice came down like a big U across North America, came all the way down to Kansas, but it missed the coasts, completely and totally missed the coast, both the east and west coast. So the Pacific Northwest has never been without its earthworms, and it's an old growth forest. How did it get there? Well, the earthworms helped get it there. Okay, reading on here. When earthworms move in, you have a fundamentally different soil environment, says McTavish. So you can get changes in pH, in the texture and density and nutrient enrichment. The problem is that the species that we have present in our forests are not used to these kinds of conditions. And this is actually, I'm sorry to say, it is not a problem because these ecosystems are changing. They are dare I say it, evolving. They are progressing. You're having a succession of different types of ecosystems from the pioneers that come in and try to establish and hold down soil very soon after this area has been left open for things to move in, for grasses and for pioneer species to move in. They've built up soil. They've broken down some of the rock and the other materials. They've mixed organic matter with it. They've now been able to produce a more advanced forest ecosystem and one that can produce a larger quantity of this leaf litter. But without something to break that down, you're not going to be able to get more diversity of life, because that mat, that spongy mat that's left after fungi have worked over those leaves, but they haven't really completely decomposed back into soil yet, that prevents seeds from germinating. That prevents new plants from growing. And yes, it prevents a change or an alteration in the ecosystem, but a change or an alteration in the ecosystem is required in order for these forests to remain healthy. So, according to McTavish, the soil environment becomes inhospitable to native plants, allowing non-native plants to thrive. I think we already covered this. In North America, in anywhere that was behind the ice limit or above the ice limit during the glacial maximum 20,000 years ago, everything is non-native there. So the complaint that non-native plants are being allowed to come in and thrive, this is what is this? An ignorance, a willful ignorance of natural history? I suppose so. Aaron Cameron, an environmental science professor at St. Mary's University in Halifax, who studies invasive earthworms, found that earthworms cause a 50% decrease in abundance in native soil invertebrates. And you see where we're going with all this. So we have changes to the boreal forest. Here it says the boreal forest is losing carbon. Oh no. We have fundamental changes occurring to a forest ecosystem as a result of, yes, climate change. No, not anthropogenic climate change, just the fact that the climate changes on our planet, guys. It's been doing it for a long time, and quite catastrophically sometimes. And our best defense against that is not imagining that we're going to be able to change the climate, because that's going to take an awful lot of energy and an awful lot of inputs, and we don't have the infrastructure for that. Instead of thinking that we can change the climate, we should be thinking in terms of how do we adapt along with it, because we're part of the ecosystem too. All right, so here we have boreal forest losing carbon. Am I getting boring? I hope I'm not getting boring, guys. I hope not. Let's see here. I hope I'm not getting boring. Is this interesting at all to you guys? It ain't at all interesting. Brian saying my worms moved to Mars. Whew. Oh my goodness, guys, it is so hot out here today. Triple digits, but I got the corn all planted. Eric says, yeah, I'm still not seeing how worms are a bad thing. Good. All right, let me get back to this story here. Let's get over here. All right, Justin pardon me. I'm gonna take a sip of coffee before I try to pronounce this. Lehole, I don't know. It is Prada Le Jolie, and they did not pronounce it correctly, or did not spell it correctly. I'm gonna bet his name is Justin Lehole, or Le Jolie. Would be Lej, what, Oliet, Le Jolie. They spelled it Lejolly. I don't know why they spelled it that way. Anyway, a soil scientist with the University of Alberta in Edmonton researching the effects. See, this is how I'm figuring it's French. Right? He's in Alberta. Researching the effects of earthworms on soil carbon dynamics, says the earthworm's voracious appetite has serious implications for the boreal forest capacity to store carbon. The boreal is special. In warmer climates, the flora of a typical forest is mixed mineral soil and organic soil. As a matter of fact, I did talk about this earlier, 2 years ago, maybe, when I was covering soil types. I was talking about muck soils. And this is a lot what you see in areas where you have permafrost. in areas where you have thawing up enough to spur a bit of life during certain months, and then it goes back into dormancy, and you have this organic matter that gets built up, and built up year after year after year, and it's all organic matter, which is great. It's got all the nutrients you could possibly want. It holds moisture really well. The problem is it holds moisture just a little bit too well, and you get boggy, and so only certain plants can survive in it, because only plants that can survive with their roots in a really boggy, highly acidic soil can survive there. All right. And this, of course, limits your species. So until something happens to change this, you have limited number of species that are able to live in an area, limited species, limited diversity of life. Also greater chance that if something goes wrong, you lose entire chains and your ecosystem has to start over from scratch. So you may want it to advance beyond this stage of being boreal if you're able to. And that of course, because it's going to require that warmer climates occur. So as we do start to experience warmer climates in parts of the north, we can cheer as the boreal forest retreats and changes. It's not a bad thing. All right. In a boreal forest, those components are distinct with thick layer of rotting leaves, mosses, and fallen wood on top of the mineral soil. I already mentioned this, what we call muck soil. All right. The spongy layer of leaf litter contains most of the carbon stored in the boreal soil. This is so great. I actually have not read this particular article before tonight. I just clicked on one that was talking about the topic, and I wanted to just follow along with it and comment on the parts that I'm agreeing with, comment on the parts I'm not agreeing with. Technically speaking, so far, most of the science facts that they're laying out in this story, I have no argument with. There's some of the conclusions, of course, that I have a disagreement with, and that's only because I happen to know a few things about some of the areas of science that are on the periphery of what these particular professionals are working with, and so I can fill in gaps that are in their knowledge. So I would love to sit down and talk with them and have discussions about this. But anyway, boreal forests, he says, this is Les Jolis, are known to be a very important terrestrial reservoir of carbon. If we lose that organic matter, it means that there is a lot of carbon that's not going to be stored in those forests anymore. Okay. All right. Les Jolis estimates that only around 10% of the boreal forest, there's a in the green, that is all what's called boreal forest, and has those characteristics that we talked about. The ground freezes, not everything decomposes. You've got thick mats. Fungi break stuff down, but it's very, very slow. The soil is mostly organic matter. We would call that muck soil. Has a tendency to be more acidic, so on and so forth. All right. So that's the picture up here in the green. All right. So, Les Jolis estimates that around 10% of the boreal forest currently has earthworms, but she projects, Les Jolis is a girl. She predicts that by 2050, most of the boreal forest will be invaded, which means the boreal forest soil could potentially lose most of its carbon stock. I'm not sure how you get to that conclusion. Because whenever the earthworm decomposes organic matter and forms a worm casting, instead of that organic matter oxidizing and going into the atmosphere, it's converted into that worm casting. So the carbon is still there. It's just in a different form than a muck soil. So I think she's worried about something unnecessarily. Not to mention that this increase in the diversity of life means that instead of storing that carbon as dead inorganic material that isn't decomposing, that may be converting into methane whenever it is getting warmed up to the point where it can convert, because you're having to rely upon anaerobes to do that decomposition work. Instead of that happening, we're going to convert that into living, growing things, which will also be storing carbon in the soil. So you're still going to be having carbon storage, just in a different fashion, in a different way. One that actually provides for more biodiversity and releases less methane into the atmosphere, which I think the people that are worried about that sort of thing would be happy to hear. Okay, Cameron, who is this? I don't know who Cameron is. They just jumped right in here and start talking about somebody named Cameron. Were we talking about somebody named Cameron before? Okay, here we go. Cameron is the person who provided this picture. Aaron Cameron. All right. Aaron Cameron is the environmental science professor at St. Mary's that's studying earthworms. As we mentioned before, all of them in Canada are non-native. All right, so we're picking up again, talking about that same researcher from previously in the story. Why did they write like this? Just jumping around all over the place makes things confusing for us. And so far, they haven't buried a bombshell in the third paragraph like Noah did. Sorry. Noah did a good job with that, though. When it was brought to their attention, they corrected the misconception right quickly. All right. So this means that boreal forests may be potentially emitting a lot more carbon in the form of carbon dioxide, which is good. Carbon dioxide we can work with. Other forms of carbon, maybe not quite so well. The carbon dioxide we can definitely work with. That's what we use when we photosynthesize. So releasing it into the Earth's atmosphere, that's good because we want it in the atmosphere if we're going to photosynthesize it. So they are releasing more than they are currently absorbing. All right. Already, rising temperatures are releasing carbon from forests by thawing permafrost and increasing the number of forest fires. Oh my, forest fires. So by having boreal forest with thick, spongy, sometimes several feet deep muck soil, people can't get around them very easily. Has lots of dead material that isn't decomposing. Sometimes whenever it gets dry, particularly whenever we enter into a period of I wouldn't say unprecedented, but very, very long cyclical drought cycle. You're going to have large amounts of dead, dry material in those forests. And yeah, it's going to be an excellent opportunity for them to burn because you don't have good forestry management practices up there in the first place. Same thing happens in California. No good forestry management practices. They keep people off of the land. Whereas when people are on the land, whenever there's dead wood, they go and they gather the wood and go, oh, this is firewood. I can use this to keep myself warm in the winter. But they keep people off of the land, off of vast tracts of forested land that people could be living on and living in harmony with nature with, where they gather that dead wood and allow that resource to be used in a constructive manner instead of leading to a forest fire. But management, governments mainly, people would be doing this naturally if they weren't stopped from doing so. All right. Cameron modeled the potential effects of earthworms on carbon stored in the forest floor. Her models found that when earthworms were present, the forest floor's carbon stock was reduced by 50 to 94% after 125 years. But most of that reduction occurred in the first 35 to 40 years. Okay, so what can we say about this? Most of the alteration happens within the first 35 to 40 years. So within 35 to 40 years, our earthworms have managed to take the backlog of organic matter that's been built up, that's prevented this particular forest from advancing to a more hospitable to life sort of arrangement. They have managed to take care of that backlog. Well, now that they've managed to do that, the only thing that they can do is keep up with the incoming amount that's currently coming in. So this is going to cause a few things to happen. After that 35 to 40 years, you don't have the same kind of forest anymore. It's not just earthworms that are going to be in here. It's going to be other types of species as well, other types of trees. And you may be surprised to know that right now, just south of the border in Wisconsin, among other places, people working in agroforestry are attempting to breed those very trees. See, we're already thinking about it. What are we going to be able to get up there and plant as that soil changes and as these ecosystems advance? Sorry, I was just checking these beans out. We're going to be using these Trail of Tears beans later on this year in conjunction with our corn video coming out later this week. So as these forests advance and as they proceed, they are not going to be the same type of forests at all. So the consequences of the models are not going to be the same as predicted in the models, because the models are not taking into account the fact that after 25, 30 years or so, the very nature of these forests will be changing. So this means, this is her conclusion, that boreal forests may potentially be emitting a lot more carbon in the form of carbon dioxide into the Earth's atmosphere than they are absorbing. Already, rising temperatures are releasing carbon from forests by thawing permafrost and increasing the number of forest fires. All right, that's what I already read. More carbon in the atmosphere from the boreal forest in Canada. Of course, if we're counteracting that by trying to push the forest line here in the temperate zone, the warm temperate zone in the United States, the area that formerly was plains, that can't be plains anymore because we don't have bison to keep it anymore, we can be working on pushing our forests further west. And if we can do that, we can move the dry line and the cyclical advancement of that dry line further to the west, which means that we have less desert environment. Oh no, we're going to have less desert environment. Another ecosystem just being lost, the desert ecosystem just being lost by the careless, invasive nature of man. Bottom line is we can use that carbon to good effect in other places. So if they're going to be losing it from that soil and not replacing it with new species, putting it back into the soil, which seems a little bit unusual, but I've seen the way the state of Wisconsin, I've seen the way the state of Wisconsin treats a lot of nursery product. I have to look and I have to double check. If I'm going to put something up here that I want to sell, like a black locust tree or a black alder tree, I have to look at the states. And some of them have, we're concerned that this plant is invasive. And some of them have, we will take legal action if you try to bring this plant in. So if they're in the we'll take legal action category, I just have to say, sorry guys, I can't ship you an alder tree and I can't ship you a black locust tree. But if you were to happen to come down here to the nursery and just, park there in the driveway and walk up and go, hi, how you doing? Shake my hand, all that stuff. We can make a local purchase and you can take it home with you. And you don't have to tell me that you're from Wisconsin. I won't say a word. Because as these ecosystems advance, they are going to need the species to fill the niches that aren't being filled by anything, because everything that was there died. And this is where humans come into play. This is where we are wonderful. We're the perfect species for this, because we can look at an ecosystem and go, what is this missing? What does this need? Oh, it needs night crawlers. And we can put them there. Unless, of course, we have people going, oh, no, they're invasive night crawlers. They're non-native. We won't know what happens if we have night crawlers on the soil. I can tell you exactly what's going to happen. Your soil is going to be loose. It's going to be well-draining. It will retain moisture. The shallow-rooted pioneer plants that are currently there, just barely holding onto the soil as it is, as the canopy expands and as the forest advances, will give way. And you'll have deep, rich, dark, wonderful soil with beautiful trees growing in it and an abundance of life. It's nothing to be afraid of, guys. It happens all over the world already. So here we go. Let me jump back into chat. Look, see what's going on. Brian says, Wisconsin. I love Wisconsin. I really do. But wow. Department of Natural Resources for Wisconsin has got a screw or two loose upstairs. All right. Oh, you guys are talking about leeches. More leeches. I remember leeches. We have leeches down here, but they're the little ones. They're not the big, long ones. The really nasty ones that are in Stand By Me. The really big ones, they're not that big. These little tiny ones that get on you. Yeah. Stagnant water, pools, sometimes in the creeks you can find them. Yep. Brian said if you're swimming at least on your toes, that's a healthy lake. Yeah, but I don't know. They kind of itch wherever they bite. At least the ones around here, if you get them on you, they itch whenever they bite. They're annoying. And they're always worried. I always worry that maybe they're going to carry some kind of disease with that bite. You never know. They're icky and gross. Ew. Oh, all right, and Vicky is saying, if I understand correctly, earthworms return fertility to the soil to form usable plants. The leaf buildup sequesters the nutrients and keeps them from being used. And this is true. They're being sequestered here above the soil horizon in the case of the boreal forest. The effective soil horizon is down here below that frost line. And so the organic matter never thoroughly mixes with the inorganic matter, the soil substrate. So you don't wind up forming any form of soil more advanced than that muck on the top, and that limits the kind of plants that can grow in that environment. And yeah, it's holding instead of holding okay. So this is what's happening. Instead of holding the carbon in the soil here below the soil horizon, mixing that with the substrate, making real soil, it's holding that carbon here above the soil horizon, and it's never becoming soil. It's never becoming true soil. And Mary's saying, explains why Canada's on fire right now. Well, part of it, yeah. And yes, they put carbon into the soil because whenever they consume that organic matter, instead of that organic matter oxidizing and becoming gaseous atmosphere, it is transformed into a solid form of stored organic matter. It becomes soil. So you definitely want those earthworms because they are going to take that carbon and move it from above the soil horizon to below the soil horizon without allowing oxidation. So, yeah, the carbon is not being lost. It's being moved to the actual soil. It's making real soil instead of this muck stuff. But yeah, you're going to lose a lot of volume. Whenever you have decomposition take place in organic matter, if I'm going to take organic matter, like we're talking fresh dead stuff, leaves, manure, wood chips, grass, if I'm going to stack it up, for every, I'd say about 10 inches or so that I've got stacked up. Whenever it finally gets done decomposing, whenever it finally gets done turning into soil, I'm going to have about 1 inch of soil left over. So it's about a 1 to 10 ratio of undecomposed organic matter to finished soil, finished compost. It's about a 1 to 10 ratio. And Canada is finally starting to churn through some of their undecomposed material, thanks to the arrival of the North American native earthworms. I'm going to call them North American native earthworms. I'm not going to apologize to Europe for our earthworms winding up in Europe, and I'm not going to apologize to Asia for our earthworms winding up in Asia. At the same time, I'm not going to accuse Europe or Asia of sending their earthworms here because I suspect at the time that these worms got swapped, it was so far in the past that it would be hard to point the finger at which group of people brought them. I can guarantee one thing, though. It wasn't the Europeans. All right. Mary is never going swimming again. I'm telling you what, let me just put that up there. When I was a kid, I used to go swimming in Hakey Creek. Hakey Creek runs past Broken Arrow down to the Arkansas River. It's named after a family of, I believe they were Osage, named the Hakeys. They owned that particular section of land, all of it. And whenever they subdivided it up and sold it, yeah, I'm going to go off on a tangent if I get started there. Whenever they subdivided it and sold it, they sold it to the people who bought it from them. They had a log cabin on it. And that was the house to begin with. That was during the McKinley administration. Over the years, the house was built on, and that's where I grew up. It was on my grandfather's farm. But Hakey Creek ran right by it, and going and swimming in the creek was something that we kind of liked to do. There was catfish in there. There was water moccasins in there. There was crawfish in there. There was leeches in there. But there was one thing that wasn't in there that you find very commonly in bodies of water these days, and that is, of course, um, metallic waste, medical waste, and broken glass. And just the quantity of potentially hazardous stuff that has been put into our waterways throughout the years makes me very, very leery of going to any body of water that I just happen to see and going in, just jumping in and getting my toes wet, because I don't know what's under the surface there. I don't know what people have been throwing into the water and disposing of there. And it's a crying shame. But a lot of our waterways that once had perfectly good water in it, you could go in, you could swim in it. Maybe you get leeches on you, maybe you wouldn't. But there are places that are now hazardous to get into because of the way people have treated those waterways. Eric's saying, do we get much fertilizer value from all that smoke? Yeah, unfortunately not. Whenever you burn forest, it doesn't give you much fertility. As a matter of fact, it's the living organisms in the soil of the forest that provide the fertility. Once the support system for those organisms is removed, forest soil becomes not very good really, really fast because it doesn't have that much nutrients stored in available form for plants. It has to be converted by the microorganisms in the soil to be delivered to the plants. So once you've got the microbiome messed up, forest soil isn't fertile anymore. However, whenever the microbiome is active and functioning, forest soil is about the most fertile thing you can get. And it all has to do with the life in the soil. Brian's talking about that leaf layer. It goes on year after year up in the forest, up there in the deciduous forest. That's about 4 inches of topsoil. Then it's sand, huge rocks, and clay. Wisconsin. Don't you know? Yeah, Wisconsin is a cool place. Dairy cows. Yep. Lots and lots of dairy cows. All right. So in Wisconsin, we've got a mixture of terrain too. You've got some of it that's forested, and then you've got a lot of it that's plains. And of course, without the bison anymore, plains is set to change, and we either change it to forest or we change it to desert. So here we go. Vicky's saying, I suspect that the science would be against the multiple millions of bison that lived on the Great Plains. Well, yeah, if they're going to be calculating the methane that those bisons are emitting whenever they pass gas, we're going to look at how much biomass the multi-millions of bison consume on a daily basis, how much of that they convert to manure, how much flatulence is there compared to what cows are producing. I'm sorry, cows comparatively are producing this much. Bison would be producing about this much. But for some reason, no. Once it's the free roaming bison, why can we not have the free roaming bison? Well, they fart everywhere. They knock down bridges. They tear up railroad ties. You can't have a transcontinental railroad and have bison at the same time. I'd be scared of them too. Like the chains that they use to secure the load don't look like they're sufficient sometimes. They don't really look sufficient at all. Mary likes her jumping worms. I do too. And if we had just European night crawlers, I'd be happy with those as well. Just as long as we have some kind of night crawler. I'm not picky, but we need something that can do that kind of work for the forest and keep it advancing beyond the pioneer stage. And since we have them, I am happy. That means our forest is very rapidly, and I'm helping it advance past the pioneer stage and getting as close as I can in my lifetime to it's not going to be an old growth forest, but it'll be well on its way to old growth. And if I can get that done before I drop dead, I think I'll be happy. Yeah, same here. I swam everywhere. Absolutely everywhere. There are a lot of misconceptions, right? So before the white man came, the air was clear, the water was pure, the land was fertile. The white man thought he could improve it. All of that is true. All of that is true. Ah, ah. So I was watching, I was watching a premiere of a video from Prager University the day before yesterday. We're in the after show now, by the way. I was watching a premiere from Prager University the day before yesterday, and it was "Not Stolen" was the title. You can find it. It's on their list of videos. They haven't taken it down. "Not Stolen" was the title, and the presenter was making a case for why it was okay for the United States government to violate its treaties with the indigenous peoples of North America, deprive them of the land that they were living on, and move uh, Americans onto those lands instead. And they were making the case for manifest destiny. The case that they were actually making, I kid you not, they were defending this, was that if a person goes to a place where another person is living and uses violent force to remove them from the place where they're living, then the person who did the aggression has the right to that property. I kid you not, they were making this case. They were making this case. And I thought, wow, I would think that Dennis over there at PragerU might have maybe paid attention to this presentation, passed it through some rational filters, and maybe wouldn't have made the case for psychopathy, because this is exactly the psychopathic argument. The psychopathic argument is, if I can do it to you and you can't stop me, then it's my right to do it. You didn't deserve to have that. You didn't deserve to have that candy. You didn't deserve to have that land. You didn't deserve to have those shoes. If I can take it from you, if you can't stop me from doing this, if you can't stop me from having my way, then I'm the right. I'm in the right. And that is manifest destiny. It's a psychopathic argument, and that's what was being made there. And so I was trying to put this out from the natural law perspective. And going, wait a minute, this is completely and totally wrong. And we're not saying that in every, and I'm not saying that in every case the land was stolen. Not in every case. Quite a few times land was purchased, and it was purchased legitimately. Now, people could argue that the amount that was being paid for land was not adequate, but I mean, in one case there was like an island that was purchased for a few bundles of beads. I believe maybe this sort of purchase is more of a token agreement, because there's something you need to know about the east coast of the United States of America, the east coast of the North American continent. If you're lower than a certain latitude, it gets hurricanes, and it's not a good place to build a permanent dwelling. As a matter of fact, my people, the ones that were living in North Carolina, were living far back enough on the continent that they were above the point where hurricanes would wipe away their houses. They went down to the oceans whenever they wanted to get salt and gather shells and go fishing and do things like that. It would take a week or so of moving a band from up here in the hills to out to the coast to work that area and to get the salt and do everything else that they were going to do. And that was something they would do whenever it wasn't hurricane season. But nobody built a permanent dwelling there. That would be stupid. But along come these settlers, and they want to build permanent dwellings there, and they want to buy land from the natives. And they're like, well, nobody really owns this land. And somebody says, well, since they say nobody owns this land, that they don't have a concept of property rights. And this, of course, gets repeated by this person that's trying to converse with me. I go, wait. You're trying to tell me that the natives don't have a comprehension of property rights, and because they don't understand property rights, that somehow this makes it okay to take their property from them by force, because it's not really stealing. They don't know what property rights are. One, false premise. Two, even if even if you were to encounter a person that does not know that the crime is being committed against them, it is still a crime to take this action. If you come up to a baby, the baby's sitting there and the baby's got a dollar in their hand, and it's a dollar, but you go, I've got a bright, shiny piece of plastic here. I'm going to give you this piece of plastic. I'm going to take your dollar. I pick the plastic up off the ground. It's trash, right? Here you go. Bright, shiny piece of plastic. Yeah, I put it in the mouth. Hey, shiny, yeah. The baby doesn't know, but you've just robbed that baby. Giving the baby a piece of plastic to choke on in exchange for its dollar bill, by this logic, is not theft or any other kind of crime. It makes no sense. It does not pass the test of reason. And I was very, very upset. It's like, why? Why in the world would you make this argument? Because yes, certainly many times property was purchased from the natives whenever it was theirs to sell. But the argument that says, well, within 50 years, these native tribes people would have been dislocated by another tribe. They wouldn't have lived there. Once again, not true. Dislocation of native tribes happened quite a bit during the French and Indian War, whenever the intertribal warfare went beyond the occasional raids to full-out bloodbaths, and that was agitated by the European powers who were trying to fight amongst themselves and use the natives as proxies. So making that argument doesn't make any sense. Besides which, I'll bet I can go to just about any place in this country and look at any home and examine the people who live there and say, I'll bet in 50 years from now, you're not going to be living here. Yes? Is this true? Just about everybody in this country within 50 years from where you are right now, will you be living in the same place? Yes or no, will you be living in the same place? No, you won't be. Most of you won't be. If most of you won't be living in the same place by this logic, then I am justified in using force to remove you from your home now and move whoever I want to into your home, because you're not going to be living there in 50 years anyway. Once again, psychopathic argument and rationalization, trying to make it okay for the psychopathic argument to stand. And it does not stand. It simply does not stand. And it just blew my top that Prager University would run an article like that, would run a piece like that. And although it shouldn't get a lot more views, maybe if a couple of you, if you're inclined to do so, might wander over and bend Dennis's ear a little bit about natural law and ask him why it is that he's supporting the argument for psychopathy. And we'll see where it goes from there. Guys, it has been past 1 hour. We have talked about the Holocene era, mankind, invasive species, what happened to North America, and why night crawlers, whether they're from Europe or from Asia, are not a problem in our forest ecosystems, because what they're doing is advancing them to a more advanced form of forest ecosystem, a healthier form of forest ecosystem, and that's a good thing. So I am going to go ahead and call it a night. Mary's talking Yupik. Youper. Someone asks you if you want to go to the bar. They mean, or go to bear. Go to bear. That means they would like you to go to the bar. Yeah. Because there's only so many things that you can do in Wisconsin in the winter. And that's drink and sleep and the thing that you do in between drinking and sleeping. Vicky saying, I'm describing the general attitude of European aristocracy. See, this is the thing, right? Our European culture, when they would ride over here, oh my gosh, I'm going to go long. Our European culture was sick. It really was. It had grown sick. And here in the States, when we tried to separate from England, we were trying to make ourselves well. We were trying to look at truth. We were trying to base our social structure around it. And yeah, we weren't doing an incredibly good job of it. But we were trying, dang it. All right. You guys have been wonderful. I'm going to go take a shower to cool off before I go to bed, because I have been really sweating my backside off today. We've got, here's what we got done so far. So I'm going to show you the video here whenever we get there. So far, we've got the corn pulled in. We got it hung up. We've got the rows where the corn was. We've pulled all the weeds out. And when I say all the weeds, I mean all the weeds. 100% of all the weeds. Pull it out of that area, set to the side so they can wilt down. I don't want them to take root and start growing again, but we're going to expose those to our vermicomposting system of producing worm casting from all of that biomass. And whenever you see the video, you see how much it is. It's a lot of biomass. So all of that's going to go right back into the system. In the meantime, what you got coming up here is Mary is asking, what's this we? I get her to help sometimes. It's her land. I work on it, so it's we. It's a partnership. All right. Where are we at? Okay, so we got all the weeds off. Those are going to compost. We're going to move the castings back onto the land after we're done converting them. But we're going to be replacing the weeds. And this is I'll give you a little sneak preview of what we're going to be talking about come Sunday on Sunday's video. We're replacing the weeds that I pulled. You see, those plants were doing something for the soil. They were growing there because I disturbed the soil and I did things that needed to be corrected. The soil was left uncovered in some places. The soil was compacted in some places. The soil was lacking nutrients in some places, so on and so forth. Various things that these weeds do if they grow in the soil, if they're allowed to grow, the things that they do, the things they accomplish. Well, I pulled those out and I disturbed the surface of the soil again. So obviously I'm going to be inviting more weeds. That's what happens whenever you disturb the soil. You're like, what happened? I turned over the soil. I tilled. I used the hoe. I did all the stuff we're supposed to do. And all these weeds keep coming up. Why do I keep on having weeds? How can I stop the weeds? How can I stop the weeds? And you don't stop the weeds. Instead of stopping the weeds, understand what the weeds are, understand the purpose that they're there for, and then work with that purpose instead of against it, and you no longer have weeds to worry about. So I took the red-rooted pigweed, and I took the lamb's quarters, and I took the grass, and instead of growing those, I put in some safflower, which is a type of thistle, and sunflower, and I put in daikon radish, and I put in sugar beet. And all of these things will work to break up the soil, prevent compaction, add extra organic matter to the soil, and hold down the soil. And I added one more. I added buckwheat, which will serve as a sponge to absorb excess fertility. So whenever we have excess fertility, instead of having that run off, get into waterways and create other episodes downstream, and of course, running off means it's leaving the property. Instead of that happening, my fertility gets locked up in the buckwheat, which means that whenever we decompose the buckwheat, I put the nutrients back into the soil. So whatever excess of nutrient I had, instead of losing that, I keep it. Only instead of locking it up in lamb's quarter, I'm going to lock it up in buckwheat. That's the only difference. And of course, this means that I'm controlling and managing what plants I'm using to be my weeds. I'm picking my weeds. And that's how we started out. We put those down as a cover crop in the corn patch. And then I switched up the way we're planting the corn. I did all of this today. All of it. I pulled the weeds yesterday, but I did all of the planting today. I took a 2.5 foot diameter hoop and I laid it down end to end across the rows and used a hand fork to just go around the inside of that. And I move the hoop over, go around the inside of that, move the hoop over, just keep on moving, bump, 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 bump. And then on the opposite side of the row, since our rows are 4 foot wide, not 5 foot wide, 5 foot wide, on the opposite side of the row, I staggered it so that we have one circle going here, circle going here, circle going here, so that they're interlocking a bit like this. You see how the one finger is not quite lined up with the other two, but there's a little gap where they overlap. Well, that allows us to bring those circles closer together, narrow, and still fill out the length of the row. I was able to put a total of 17 of these circles, 2.5 foot diameter circles, into each row, which is 4 foot wide and 20 foot long. 4 foot wide, 20 foot long. Now, a 2.5 foot diameter hoop is exactly 8 feet in circumference. So if you go along at the cardinal points of this hoop, north, south, east, west, northwest, northeast, southwest, southeast, each one of those cardinal points of that hoop and put one seed at each point. You have spaced each of these seeds exactly 1 foot apart. And if I come into the center of that hoop and I put one more there, I have managed to put down 9 seeds for each one of these hoops. So there's 17 of them in a 4x20 row. And we have 3 of those rows. So if you're doing your math, that is 405 corn plants that we put in there, where once we were doing 4 rows spaced 1 foot apart. So we've actually, by changing the organization of how we're planting, instead of in rows, we're doing it in rings. I have gotten more plants into the space. I've put more space between the plants, so they have more of the nutrients and water and stuff like that. They get more of that individually. And now, as those come up, whenever they get to be about a foot high or so, we'll be putting in these Cherokee Trail of Tears black beans, probably about 2 or 3 of these per plant. And those vines are going to come up. They're going to wrap themselves around the corn stalks and bind those stalks in the circle together. So whenever we have wind events like we had earlier this year, it won't flatten the corn and cause me to lose about half of it. So anyway, guys, that's it. I am headed off to the shower and to bed. As you can see, my shirt's getting darker and darker and darker by the second. Mary, thank you very much for the cup. Brian and Vicky and everyone else that tuned in tonight, thanks for joining us. As always, if you found the video informative or entertaining, you know what to do. I'm going to catch you next time. Until then, get out there